Let me tell you my story from the very beginning. My name is Marcus, and this all happened in America in a quiet city called Riverbend in Colorado. Riverbend is the kind of place where people greet each other on the street and pretend they know everything about everyone. They saw my life from the outside and thought they understood it, but they were wrong. They saw me as an ordinary man with an ordinary life, driving my old gray pickup and wearing the same simple jacket almost every day. They did not see the numbers in the bank, the hidden companies, or the life I kept far away from their eyes. They did not know I was already a billionaire before I ever met the woman who would become my wife. Her name was Vivian Cross, and to the people of Riverbend, she was a dream. She lived in a large white house on a hill, the kind of house that made you feel small when you drove past it. It had tall glass windows that caught the morning light, a shining black gate that opened with a soft hum, and a long stone path that led to a thick wooden front door. Neighbors spoke about her with respect and envy. They said she was elegant, strong, and successful. They said I was lucky to have married her. They did not know how she spoke when no one else was listening, when the doors were closed and the curtains were drawn. When I first met her at a charity event in downtown Riverbend, she looked perfect in a dark blue dress, her hair pinned up, a glass of white wine in her hand. She laughed at my jokes, asked questions about my small job, and smiled like she truly saw me. I remember thinking, here is a woman who will love me for who I am, not for what I have. That thought was the reason I hid the truth from her. On paper, I looked like a man with a simple salary and a modest life. I let her believe that. I did not tell her about the $3.4 billion spread quietly across banks in America and Europe, or about the houses and land I bought under holding companies with different names. I wanted to know if someone could love me without seeing the numbers first. We got married quickly, within 6 months of knowing each other. The wedding was beautiful, small but polished, held in the garden of her hilltop house. White lights hung from the trees, soft music played, and people kept walking up to me, shaking my hand and saying, "You're a lucky man, Marcus." I smiled and agreed because at that time I believed it. I looked at Vivian in her white dress and thought I had done the right thing. I thought I had finally found love that had nothing to do with money. I told myself that, once I was sure, I would tell her everything and place all my wealth openly between us like a shared secret. 3 days after the wedding, I saw the first real crack. Vivian called me into her closet. It was bigger than my old living room in my previous house, with soft white walls, golden lights, and a long shelf that ran from one end to the other. On that shelf sat rows and rows of shoes, red heels, gold heels, black boots, silver sandals, and soft leather flats. Some had crystals. Some looked like they had never touched the ground. I remember standing there for a moment, a little overwhelmed, as if I were staring at a museum of footwear. Then she pointed at them with a lazy wave of her hand and said, "Clean them." At first, I thought she was making a joke. I smiled and asked, "All of them," hoping she would smile back and say she was teasing. Instead, she narrowed her eyes, her voice turning cold and sharp. "Yes, all of them, Marcus. I don't want dust on anything I wear. You married me, not the other way around. So don't look at me like this is strange." Something inside my chest tightened, like a small knot being pulled hard. I had grown up cleaning my own shoes, my own floors, my own life. Work was not the problem. It was the way she said it, the tone that told me she saw me not as a partner, but as a tool. Still, I stayed quiet. I took a soft cloth from the drawer, knelt down in front of the long shelf, and began to wipe the shoes one by one. As I worked, she walked past me in a silk dress, her perfume strong in the air. She paused just behind me and said, in a flat, bored voice, "You're so slow. You really are useless, Marcus. Do you think marrying me makes you important? Do you think you're my father now, telling me what to do?" Her words hit me harder than any slap. I did not answer. I kept my head down and focused on the shine of the leather, the way the light reflected off the polished surface. Inside, my thoughts whispered, "Wait, watch, give it time. People say things when they are stressed. Maybe she will change when she feels safe." But that was not the last time she spoke to me like that. For the first 3 months of our marriage, I obeyed her like a servant. I woke up early to make her breakfast just the way she liked it. I cooked for her, washed the dishes, and cleaned the marble floors of the big white house. I drove her to the city center of Riverbend so she could shop in the most expensive stores. I stood outside the fitting rooms holding her bags while she tried on new dresses and shoes. I watched her spend $50,000 on shoes in one afternoon without any care, while I kept my true wealth hidden behind bank screens and silent accounts. To the staff in the shops, I was just her quiet, average husband, the man lucky enough to stand behind her. At parties, it was even worse. She would hold my arm as we walked in, but once we were inside, she spoke about herself, her business, her trips, and her taste. When people finally turned to me and asked, "And what do you do, Marcus?" she would answer for me. "He has a small job, nothing special," she would say with a forced smile. "But he's fine." She never called me kind. She never called me strong or smart. She never said my love in front of others. I felt myself shrinking in that house full of light and glass, as if I were fading into the background of my own life. At night, I would lie beside her in our wide, soft bed and stare at the ceiling, watching the faint shadows move across it. The house was beautiful, yes, but the air inside felt heavy, like it carried all the unspoken insults and orders thrown at me during the day. I would remember the days when I lived in a smaller house in another city, when I cooked for myself, and no one called me worthless. I would think about the men and women who worked for my companies and respected me, not because they knew my net worth, but because I treated them fairly. I began to ask myself a quiet question in the dark. If she knew I was rich, would she act differently? Would she suddenly find respect for me? And if she did, would that respect mean anything at all? One night, the truth finally hit me hard enough that I could not ignore it. Vivian had gone to dinner with friends and returned late. She was annoyed because the driver we used sometimes was busy, so I had to pick her up myself. When we entered the house, she walked straight to her closet, took off her high heels, and threw them at me because there was a tiny mark on the heel, a mark no one else would ever see. "You can't even keep my shoes perfect," she snapped. "What good are you?" The shoes hit my chest and dropped to the floor with a dull sound. I bent down to pick them up, and in that moment, something inside me broke quietly and cleanly. I looked at the shoes in my hands, then at her angry face, and a clear thought rose in my mind. Enough. It is time she sees who I am. The breaking point did not come the same night she threw those shoes at me, but the crack she made in me that evening never really closed. I went to bed with a quiet storm inside and woke up the next day with the same heavy feeling in my chest. For days, I watched her move around the house like a queen who believed the walls bowed to her. I kept hearing her words in my head. "What good are you?" They echoed when I made her coffee, when I drove her to her hair appointments in the center of Riverbend, when she walked through expensive shops and tossed clothes at me to hold. She had no idea that the man she insulted like a servant was the person who had quietly paid for that entire life. One gray morning in late autumn, everything finally came together. The sky over Riverbend was the color of wet concrete. The trees on the hill behind the house had turned red and gold, and a cold wind slid in between the gaps of the windows, making the curtains move slowly. I woke up earlier than usual, because I knew I was done pretending. It felt like the day I had been walking toward since our wedding, a day I had tried to avoid but could no longer escape. I stood at the kitchen counter, making coffee for both of us, when Vivian walked in. She wore a pale silk robe that flowed behind her like a small wave, and her hair was tied back in a loose knot. She did not say good morning. She never did anymore. Instead, she went straight to the table, placed a pair of high heels on it, and pushed them toward me as if she were sliding a bill across to a waiter. "Clean them, Marcus," she said, her voice flat and impatient. "There's a small spot on the side. You missed it yesterday. Do you even see anything with those eyes?" I looked at the shoes, then at her face. Something in me refused to bend this time. I could feel my spine growing stiff, solid, as if it had finally remembered its purpose. In that moment, the memory of my small house in Redwood Heights came back to me sitting on the porch, drinking cheap coffee, feeling more respected alone than I did standing in this polished kitchen with her. I put the coffee cup down slowly. For months, I had dropped my gaze, taken off my shoes, and knelt on the floor without a word. That morning, I did not bend. "No," I said quietly. "I'm not cleaning them today." The room went still. The only sound was the soft ticking of the clock on the wall. Vivian's eyes narrowed, and she set the robe tighter around herself, as if she were suddenly cold. She picked up the shoes and slammed them down harder on the table. "What did you say?" she asked, her voice already rising. I said no. I repeated, my voice calm but firm. "I'm not cleaning your shoes." She took one step closer to me, then another, until she was standing right in front of me. I could see the small lines near her eyes, lines I had never noticed when I was busy looking down at the floor. Her chest moved quickly, and I could feel the anger coming off her like heat. "You worthless man," she shouted. "You think that just because you married me, you're something? You think you'll become my father and order me around? You're nothing, Marcus. Nothing. You live in my house. You eat my food. Remember that." I should have felt crushed. For 3 months, words like that had pushed me lower and lower inside myself. But for some reason, what I felt in that moment was not pain. It was clarity. Something inside me clicked into place, and I realized this was exactly the moment I had been waiting for, the moment when I could finally show her the truth. I smiled. It surprised her. It even surprised me. "You think this is your house?" I asked. My voice was still soft, but underneath it was a steel she had never heard from me before. She folded her arms across her chest. "Of course, it is my house. My name is on everything. I built this life, not you." I reached into my pocket and took out my phone. My hand was steady. I opened one of my banking apps, the kind I had never let her see. Numbers filled the screen, lines of balances and account names scattered across America and Europe. I walked around the table and stood close enough that she could not look away. Then I turned the screen toward her. "Look," I said. Her eyes moved over the numbers once, then again. The anger on her face faded, replaced first by confusion, then disbelief. I watched her lips part slightly as she tried to read the digits in her head. "Is that real?" she whispered, her voice small for the first time since I had known her. "Those are my accounts in America," I said. I tapped the top line with my finger. "You see that amount? That is $1.2 billion. And that other one?" I swiped to another page. "That is $2.2 billion in a private bank in Europe. Not counting the houses, the companies, the land. This is just what you can see on this screen." She stared at me like I had turned into another person right in front of her. "You're rich?" "I am a billionaire, Vivian," I said, looking her straight in the eyes. "I lived in a small house in Redwood Heights, Virginia, long before I met you. I own that house. I own 10 more across America. I chose to live simply. I chose to come here for love." She stumbled back and grabbed the back of a chair to keep her balance. The strong, sharp woman who had just called me worthless was suddenly quiet and unsteady. "Why didn't you tell me?" she asked. "Why would you hide this?" "Because I wanted to see how you would treat a man you thought was poor," I said. "I wanted to see if you had kindness, not greed. I wanted to know if you could respect a man without seeing numbers in a bank account first." Her mouth opened, but no words came out. The silence between us felt heavy, as if all the months of insults and orders had finally turned into a clear, solid wall. I walked to the kitchen counter and picked up a black leather folder I had placed there earlier that morning. It had been waiting just like I had, quiet and patient. I brought it to the table and set it down in front of her. "What's that?" she asked, her voice still weak. "Documents," I said. "The house you are so proud of? The one on the hill that you call your house in front of everyone? It has been under my holding company since the week before our wedding. I bought it in full for $8.5 million. I promised myself that if you treated me with respect, I would put your name on the papers as well. I was ready to do that. I was ready to give you half of everything." Her hand shook as she opened the folder. She flipped through the pages, and then her eyes stopped on the deed. There, clear and simple, was the name of the owner. Mine. Only mine. She looked up at me, her eyes wide with shock. So, all this time, this house, this life, it was never yours to hold over my head, I said. You never fed me. I fed you. You never sheltered me. I sheltered you. You made me feel like a beggar in my own home. Her eyes filled with tears, but I did not stop. I reached into the folder again and pulled out one more paper, a thin stack clipped together. I held it between two fingers so she could see the top line, where our names were written next to each other. This, I said slowly, is our divorce document. Her tears spilled over. No. Marcus, no. That's not funny. It's not meant to be funny, I replied. My voice did not shake. She tried to reach for the paper, but I pulled it back toward my chest. For 3 months, I said, I obeyed you. I cleaned your shoes like a servant. I let you call me worthless. I let you tell me I was nothing. You shouted at me in my own house, in my own kitchen, as if I had no right to stand here. That ends today. I will not live with someone who only sees my value once she sees my money. In that moment, standing in that bright kitchen with gray light coming through the windows, I felt something I had not felt in a long time. Control. I had put the truth in front of her, calm and clear. There was no going back now. We went to the lawyer in the city center later that same week. His office was in a tall glass building that looked over the heart of Riverbend. The sky was pale and washed out, and the whole city felt like it was holding its breath. I remember riding the elevator with Vivian in silence. She stood on the opposite side, arms crossed, her eyes fixed on the glowing floor numbers. For the first time since I had met her, she looked unsure, like the ground under her feet was no longer solid. The lawyer's name was Edward Lane, an older man with silver hair and calm gray eyes. He had seen many marriages end, and I could tell he recognized the look on both our faces, a mix of anger, fear, and tiredness. His office was simple but expensive, with dark wooden shelves, a wide desk, and large windows that showed the streets of Riverbend below. When we stepped inside, he greeted us with a quiet nod and asked us to sit. Vivian's hands were already shaking. As soon as we sat down, she turned to me, her voice soft and broken. Marcus, please, she said, reaching for my arm. I was angry. I didn't mean those words. You should have told me who you were. You should have told me about the money. We can fix this. We can start over. Edward looked at me and said nothing. He just waited, the pen resting between his fingers. I took a deep breath and stared at the papers in front of me. My name and Vivian's name, side by side, at the top of the divorce document. I thought of the day we had signed our marriage certificate, when those same names had looked full of hope. Vivian, I said finally, turning to her, if I were truly worthless in your eyes when you thought I was poor, then your love was never real. You didn't love me. You loved power. You loved control. You loved the feeling of being above me. She shook her head quickly, tears spilling down her cheeks. I was just scared, she said. I grew up with nothing. When I finally had money, I felt like I had to control everything or I'd lose it again. I know I was cruel. I know I was wrong. I'm sorry. Please, Marcus. Don't do this. Don't throw everything away. But in my chest, something had already died. Those 3 months had felt like 3 years. Nights of being called useless, days of being treated like a servant in a house I owned. That kind of wound does not close just because the person who caused it is suddenly afraid. I didn't throw this away, I told her. You did. Every time you shouted at me, every time you used me like a tool, every time you acted as if I was beneath you, you pushed this marriage closer to the edge. I hid my money to find love. What I found instead was how you treat someone when you think they have nothing. Edward slid the pen toward me. The room felt very quiet. I picked it up, signed my name where he pointed, and put the pen down. My hand didn't shake. It almost scared me how steady I felt. Then he turned the papers toward Vivian. Her fingers trembled as she took the pen. For a moment, I thought she might refuse, that she would push the papers away and run out of the office. But she didn't. Slowly, as tears dropped onto the white page, She signed her name too. When it was done, Edward gathered the documents with the calm hands of a man who has watched many endings. When we stepped out of the building, the sky over Riverbend was empty and colorless. I walked ahead toward the parking lot. My steps echoed on the concrete. Vivian followed behind me, her heels clicking too fast, like her heart was trying to catch up with what had just happened. At the car, she grabbed my sleeve. "Where will you go?" she asked, her voice barely more than a whisper. "To my old house in Redwood Heights," I said. "The one where people spoke to me with respect. Maybe I'll sell this big house. Maybe I'll leave it empty. I don't know yet." Right there, in the middle of the cold parking lot, she dropped to her knees. The same woman who had once stood over me while I knelt to clean her shoes was now kneeling on the rough concrete. "Marcus, forgive me. Please," she whispered. "Give me one more chance. I will change. I promise. I'll clean my own shoes. I'll cook for you. I'll do anything. Just don't leave me." I closed my eyes. For a second, I saw the woman I had hoped she was, the one from the charity event, with the warm laugh and the curious questions. I wanted to believe that version of her was still there, buried under the pride and the fear. But then I remembered the nights she called me worthless, the shoes hitting my chest, the way she treated me like I belonged to her. I opened my eyes, opened the car door, and sat down. I looked at her one last time and said the only thing left to say. "Goodbye, Vivian." I drove away, but that was not the end. A month later, I returned to the White House on the Hill to pick up some personal documents and speak to the staff. When I opened the gate and walked up the stone path, I saw her standing on the doorstep, waiting. "Marcus," she said quietly, "please, just listen." She had been waiting, and she kept waiting. Every time I came back to Riverbend to meet lawyers or check on the property, she was there at the door. Sometimes she held flowers. Sometimes she held a folded letter. But most days, all she had were the same two words: "Forgive me." As the years passed, the picture changed slowly. I moved from my house in Redwood Heights and another place I bought in a coastal town called Seaside Grove, Florida. I bought a small cottage in Brighton, England, for £2 million, a quiet place by the sea where I could walk alone and breathe. But whenever business pulled me back to Riverbend, whenever I drove up that old hill and stopped in front of that White House, I would see her again. Her clothes changed with the seasons. Her hair grew shorter. Fine lines drew themselves gently around her mouth and eyes. But her words never changed. "I'm sorry. Forgive me. I know my mistake now." And every time I walked past her, I did not shout. I did not insult her. I just looked at her and said, "I hope you truly learn from this, Vivian. But I am not coming back." Then I stepped inside, closed the door behind me, and let the echo of that choice fill the empty rooms. People sometimes ask me now, "Marcus, did you ever forgive Vivian?" When I hear that question, I feel a small pull in my chest. The truth is, I forgave her in my heart, but I did not go back to her. Forgiveness and return are not the same thing. I let go of the anger so it would not poison my life, but I kept the door closed so I would not walk back into the same fire. Life did not stop when our marriage ended. It just slowly turned in a new direction, like a ship changing course in the middle of a wide, quiet ocean. About 3 years after the divorce, I moved more often between my place in Redwood Heights and the coastal town of Seaside Grove in Florida. I bought a house near the beach there, not the biggest in the area, but one with a wide porch and a view of the water. One afternoon, I was sitting on a bench near a small clinic, eating a cheap sandwich and watching the waves in the distance, when a stray dog wandered close to the road. A woman stepped out of the clinic doors, saw the animal, and walked over with calm steps. She knelt down, opened her bottle of water, and poured some into her hand so the dog could drink. No one was there to praise her. No one was taking pictures. It was just her and a thirsty dog. That was the first time I saw Claire Monroe. We started talking a few minutes later when the dog ran off, and she sat on the bench beside me to rest. She told me she worked as a nurse in that small clinic, that she liked helping people even though the hours were long, and the pay was not great. She did not ask what car I drove or how much I made. She asked if I was sleeping well, because she said I looked tired around the eyes. Coffee turned into dinners. Dinners turned into long walks on the sand, where we spoke about simple things, fears, dreams, old mistakes, and quiet hopes. One night, as we walked along the beach with the waves touching our shoes, I told her, "Claire, there is something you should know about me." I showed her the same banking app one had once shown Vivian. I told her about the houses in America, about the small cottage I had bought in Brighton in England for a few £1,000,000, about the companies that worked silently in my name. She stared at the numbers, then looked up at me and asked a question no one else ever had. "You have all this, but are you happy?" That single question felt like a hand reaching into a dark room and turning on a light. We married a year later in a small church in Seaside Grove. My friend Daniel Ward came from Redwood Heights. Some of Claire's co-workers stood in simple clothes, and a kind old pastor spoke about second chances. No one talked about my billions. They talked about kindness, patience, and respect. Claire and I bought a new house together in Seaside Grove. It cost about $1.4 million, but the number is not what matters to me. What I remember is her laugh in the kitchen, the way she wipes my tears when old memories wake me at night, and the way she always says, "I'll clean my shoes, you clean yours." We're partners, not masters. Sometimes, when the evening is quiet, I stand at our front door and think of the white house on the hill in Riverbend. I picture Vivian standing at that old door, waiting, whispering, "Forgive me." Maybe she truly changed. Maybe she lives a better life now in another house somewhere in America. I do not wish her harm. I wish her growth. But I am done being the man who kneels to prove his worth. In this house, with Claire and our little daughter Emily playing on the floor, there are still billions in the bank and properties across America and in Europe, but the most valuable thing I own now is peace. And in this home, no one throws shoes, no one calls anyone worthless, and no one has to beg for the basic respect that love should always bring with it.